Welcome to Polaris Live. This is Sarwar Kashmeri welcoming our viewers from around the world to this series of programs on the United States and China in the world. This program is brought to you in conjunction with the Foreign Policy Association of New York. Founded in 1918, the Foreign Policy Association has, for over a century, been a witness to a profoundly changed America in a profoundly changed world. It is my great pleasure to introduce today my guest, the President and CEO of the Foreign Policy Association, Mr. Noel Lateef. Mr. Lateef is the longest-serving president of the Foreign Policy Association. During his tenure at the helm of the FPA, the Soviet Union imploded, the US became the world's sole superpower. Now, with the rise of China, he guides the FPA as the world again returns to a true superpower state, but with a crucial difference: the rise of the global South, in which numerous rising powers such as India, South Africa, Brazil compete for influence. Prior to joining the Foreign Policy Association in 1995, Mr. Lateef was a prominent banker and lawyer in New York. He has authored numerous publications, including his latest book, which is called Ukraine, Changing World Order, which features 7 international contributors, many of whom are not widely printed in the United States. In this increasingly complex world, the challenge for Mr. Lateef is perhaps the most complex since its founding: how to lead this influential organization whose mission today is, as it has been for over 100 years, to serve as a catalyst for developing awareness, understanding, and informed opinion on U.S. foreign policy and global issues. Please welcome to Polaris Live, Mr. Noel Lateef. How are you, Noel?
I am well, Sarwar. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. And what I would like to do, a third of our readership, Noel, is out of this country. So I thought I would ask you right at the beginning, how would you describe the Foreign Policy Association? Is it a policy-making organization? Is it educational organization? Is it a think tank, Republican, Democratic, independent? You say?
Sarwar, I would answer that the Foreign Policy Association is an educational organization. It is nonpartisan. And it has been very constant in its mission, which, as you very well put it, is to engage and inform the public about global issues that face us and are of great moment.
And how am I correct that it's completely nonpartisan? It doesn't lean one way or the other, and
we are scrupulously nonpartisan. And when I said that to my good friend Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the historian who was a very prominent member of the Kennedy administration, a Democrat. He winced, but I think we are very keen about ventilating many different perspectives. And as you highlighted, our latest special edition of Great Decisions on Ukraine features perspectives from many contributors from overseas. And we think it's very healthy to be exposed to as many different perspectives as possible. Our board of directors is comprised of Republicans and Democrats and independents, and I like to think we have a big tent.
Well, thank you for that. And, you know, Noel, it's amazing that in the 100-year plus history of your organization, It's been an eyewitness to the First World War, the Second World War, birth of the European Union, implosion of the Soviet Union, Korean, Vietnam wars, 9/11, Afghanistan, Iraq, now Russia, Ukraine. It's just an amazing trajectory. Would you say the FPA has changed over these years, and how has it remained the same?
Well, I think, as I have mentioned, our mission continues to be constant, but the technology that we have resorted to, whether it was radio in the 50s, television with our Great Decisions television series, and now social media have changed. I think it's always been key from our perspective to provide contextual and thorough information about the issues that we seek to brief for the public. And we feel that our mission has never been more important because we are seeing that the media outlets have cut back on their presence overseas. And if the truth be told, international affairs coverage seems to have diminished considerably over the years. So we feel that what we're doing has never counted for more.
Well, you know, Noel, one of the things that always impresses me when I attend a function at the Foreign Policy Association is the number of young people, seniors at college, just beginning their work. And we keep hearing that the new generation is not as involved and not as engaged. But why is it they show up at the FPA functions?
Well, I really believe that that generalization that they're not interested is unfair and is, I guess, what you would call a sweeping generalization. We find that young people are very curious about what's happening in the world. They recognize that what happens abroad can affect their careers. And increasingly, we have tried to generate materials that are aimed not only at high school students, but also at college students, and through our John C. Whitehead Fellows Program at Future Leaders. So we take what might be called a Jesuit approach and try to reach them while they're young.
Well, having gone to a Jesuit school in college, I applaud what you do, obviously. But you know, there must have been some instances during your tenure and at other times when the board and the FPA must have asked itself, what are we doing here? And I was thinking specifically, Noel, about when the Soviet Union collapsed out of nowhere. And the historian Francis Fukuyama declared it the end of history. Did the FPA ever, say to itself, oh my goodness, we might as well pack it up. There's nothing left to talk about.
Well, if the truth be told, that was about the time I arrived as president. And just before I arrived, the Ford Foundation, which had been one of the principal benefactors of the organization, commissioned a blue ribbon panel to look into our future and to see whether there was a reason for the FPA to continue. And I remember reading this report with great interest, having just taken the job. And it was interesting to see that the conclusion was a resounding yes, that there was a need for this organization, that notwithstanding the end of the Cold War and perhaps the possibility of turning inward and focusing on domestic priorities, that we still needed to be on top of what was happening around the world, particularly when it came to so-called intermestic issues, issues that intermingle both domestic and international considerations. And those issues are very much alive with us today, whether it's climate change or pandemics or the increasing trends of migration. These are not going away, and I think the FPA has been following them for some time.
Noel, has it been hard to be a totally non-partisan organization? Because everywhere you look now, things are so polarized. I know it's a difficult question, but has this been a very hard thing to do?
If the truth be told, we find that our programming is more effective when we can ventilate multiple perspectives. And so they may not happen all at the same time on the same occasion, but we do try to bring in individuals with different ideological views. And whenever a format that is very effective is the debate format. And if you compare debaters of equal skill and knowledge, the audience derives a lot of benefit from that.
I'm so familiar intimately with the organization, but I want to tell people who've not had the good fortune to sit in some of the programming that the FPA has done, that over the years, nearly every US president since Franklin D. Roosevelt has spoken at the FPA's forums. And in the past 2 decades alone, over 80 world leaders have spoken to the FPA's members. And my question is, what draws these people to address
I like
forums?
to think, Sarwar, that we have at FPA the principal public forum in New York City for foreign policy addresses, attracting both national and international attention. I will never forget my first meeting as president with the vice premier and foreign minister of China, Chen Qishan. We must have had over 120 different news outlets, media outlets at the Plaza Hotel covering the event. And it was very interesting because the day before the vice premier joined us, he made a comment he gave a speech, and he was quoted as saying by our then Secretary of State that China was not going to sell nuclear reactors to certain countries. And someone in our audience, a member of the FPA, asked him about this at our meeting. And he indicated that he really had not made that commitment. And needless to say, the following morning, that was like a headline around the country. So what I think is good about this forum is that it is a public forum where you get to hear directly from world leaders, and they have a chance to communicate directly with the American public.
It's just fascinating. I'm going to just remind our viewers, Noel, that the PolarisLive.com is non-commercial. We are supported completely by our leaders, and you can show your support by signing up a newsletter, which is on my website, kashmeri.com, Kashmeri, and by subscribing to the YouTube channel, which is where our entire archive is kept. And let's go back now to my guest, the president and CEO of the Foreign Policy Association and New York. One of the FPA's legendary initiatives is the Great Decision series, with chapters all around the country. And Noel, can you tell us what's so special about Great Decisions and why many consider that to be the inspiring heart of the Foreign Policy Association?
Sure, Sarwar. Great Decisions is the flagship program of the Foreign Policy Association, and it is truly a impressive outreach program because it attracts young people, it attracts people from very diverse backgrounds, and it revolves around a briefing book that the Foreign Policy Association publishes every year called Great Decisions, which identifies the 8 issues that we think are going to be of the most importance in the coming year. And so to give you an example, for 2024, topics will include pandemic preparation, climate technology, US and China investment strategies, science across borders, and NATO, which you, Sarwar, are going to be, you are the author of that particular essay. And at the end of each essay are questions that are part of a survey that we do that's tabulated for us. And this results in a deliberative poll, deliberative in the sense that people have thought about the issues before they make their positions known. And that poll is shared with policymakers in Washington. I really think that the Great Decisions format is very important and can be built upon as a template for interaction in a democracy, because what I find is that the participants in these Great Decisions discussion groups enjoy and look forward to hearing what their peers have to say. And they come in sometimes with a position that is already fully formed, but more often with an open mind to hear what their peers are thinking, and to have the benefit of an expert such as yourself clarifying the subject matter and providing a lot of background on it. So it's always very heartening to me to get reports from the Great Decisions discussion groups that the members find that they benefit so much from them. And we're going to be experimenting with something in the new year that I think is going to be very important, namely looking to the groups to create multimedia background materials that showcase what their discussions have arrived at, but also materials from YouTube and other sources that are available. And then we will package this and in turn make it available to the entire network. So this will be a very different approach. The idea is to not be dependent on creating these materials, this content, purely here in New York, but in engaging the 400,000 or so participants in Great Decisions across the country.
That is an amazing number that you've just given us for some 400,000 participants. And as I understand it, Noel, correct me if I'm wrong, that there actually is an organized way that these groups around the country feed back answers to questionnaires and opinions, and then the FPA summarizes and reflects that to policymakers. Am I right?
You're absolutely correct. That is the national opinion ballot report that we issue when we receive over 30,000 ballots back. And we also rely on our volunteer coordinators who frequently act as discussion group leaders and organize the discussion groups, as well as on a network of 92 World Affairs Councils across the United States. And these are located in all the major cities in the country.
You know, you talked about I believe the Vice Premier of China, who was with you almost 3 decades, back, and I'm reminded that China then was a very developing country. I remember a hilarious episode when Deng Xiaoping was here, and President Jimmy Carter said, you know, you need to show a little more sympathy for your countrymen who want to emigrate. I don't know if this was on an FPA platform or not. And do you remember, Noel, that Deng Xiaoping said, well, how would you like 5 million next month?
I don't think that transpired at FPA, but I do recall looking at one of Arthur Schlesinger's histories of the United States and going through the index to see if the Foreign Policy Association was mentioned. And sure enough, there was a reference to a speech that President Carter gave at the Foreign Policy Association, in which he memorably said, we have learned the lesson of Vietnam. We should not inject U.S. power in the internal affairs of other countries.
Wow. Should be framed and hung in the Oval Office, isn't it? So I'm interested. You know, this Ukraine war, on which you have put together this incredible book, and I was not witness to it, but I followed as you labored through completing the book and getting all the material from these the experts. And one of the things that has happened is the Russia-Ukraine war has kind of blown up this two-power world we used to live in. And now there are all these countries in the so-called global South, Brazil and India, and South Africa, and so on. And now they are starting to jockey for position. How is your board? How are you looking at the FPA? Are you thinking about how you will cover this transformation? In your mind, is this a dramatic transformation that is taking place, equivalent to the blow-up of the Soviet Union? What do you think, Noel? It's a blue sky question, and a blue sky answer will be fine.
I would hesitate to generalize, but I do think that we are at a very important juncture on the road here in terms of the future of the current world order. The current world order, as you know, traces its origins back to the end of the Second World War. And I'm very proud to say that the vision for the United Nations was set out at the Foreign Policy Association by President Franklin Roosevelt in a very significant speech that he delivered before our members at the Waldorf Astoria. And in that speech, President Roosevelt envisioned an organization that would be quite muscular in terms of its ability to maintain world peace. I think we have seen over the years that with the vetoes, with a certain paralysis at the Security Council level, his vision has not fully materialized. And we are, again, at a tipping point as to how world order will be governed. And my own view, if I can share my personal view, is that the values that are enshrined in the UN Charter need to be upheld, and we need to be talking about reform of the UN system, but in a way that brings in, as you say, a lot of the new players who are now expecting a place at the table. And I think President Biden made a very interesting overture in this regard at last year's UN General Assembly week, when he entertained the idea of enlarging the Security Council. So there is work to be done, and I think that we at the FPA need to be doing more to highlight the future of multilateralism, looking both at its benefits and ways to correct its liabilities.
Which leads me, Noel, to, I think, what will be my final question to you before we run out of time. And you very accurately painted where the world is heading. And what I want to ask you is you work for a board. Is your board a passive board? Is it a very active board? Have they taken the initiative of saying, you know, the FPA needs to be positioned in this era of transformation? Can you tell us a little bit about the board and whether it's passive, whether it takes the kind of interest that keeps the Foreign Policy Association thriving?
Thank you for that question, Sarwar, because I like to say that an organization is only as strong as its board of directors. And we are very blessed to have a very engaged board. We interact with them extensively. And for example, when we try to identify these critical issues that we want to brief in great decisions, we will invite them to make recommendations, and more often than not, we act on those recommendations. So it's very important to have a board that is proactive and that has views on these subjects. Having said that, FPA board meetings are a model of civility, despite sometimes contentious issues. And I think that is another template for our times, that you can bring people from different ideological backgrounds and ventilate the issues in a civilized way.
Well, you've exercised the humility that I've seen at work over many years of knowing you, Noel. It's, I'm sure you play a large part in the board acting as they do. But listen, Mr. Noel Lateef, Noel, we have run out of time. And I want to thank you for coming to Polaris Live, and perhaps at another appropriate time, you will take a few minutes and come back and join us again. It's a privilege to have had you as a guest.
Thank you, Sarwar. Good to be with you.
Well, with that, we end this program with the president of the Foreign Policy Association, which it is a privilege for Polaris Life to be associated with in our programming. So I want to say goodbye and thank you to our viewers from around the world. I hope you will join us again next week when we bring you a well-known expert to talk about the issues of today. Until then, goodbye.